Minutes after I gave birth to my own son, I heard a weak, struggling cry from the hospital room next door. I found a newborn baby girl, abandoned and fighting for every breath. I held her, I comforted her, a complete stranger. I had no idea that 9 months later, a social worker would show up at my door and tell me that the only person on earth who could save that little girl's life was... Before we get into it, I'd love to know, what city are you watching from today? And be sure to subscribe for our daily stories. Okay, let's head back to that maternity ward. The moment the nurse placed my newborn son in my arms, the world, which had been a chaotic, painful, and noisy blur, suddenly snapped into a silent, perfect, and singular focus. He was so small, so perfect. His tiny fingers, with their impossibly perfect little fingernails, curled around one of my own. I looked at him, at his dark, downy hair, at the gentle rise and fall of his chest, and I was consumed by a love so profound, so absolute, that it was a physical thing, a warm, golden light that filled every empty space inside me. My husband, Samuel, stood beside me, his own face a beautiful ruin of happy, exhausted tears. "He's perfect, Maddie," he whispered, his hand gently stroking our son's head, just like his mother. He was the perfect, doting new father, his eyes shining with a love and an adoration that made my own heart ache with a joy so pure it was almost painful. We named him Arthur. Our little family was finally complete. Our life, I believed in that moment, was perfect. The first 24 hours were a beautiful, sleepless, and magical haze of new parent bliss. But it was in the dead of the second night, in that strange, suspended time in a hospital when the world outside is asleep and the only sounds are the quiet beep of monitors and the soft footsteps of the night shift nurses, that the first discordant note was struck in my perfect symphony. Samuel had gone home to get a few hours of real sleep. I was alone in my room, my own sweet Arthur sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside my bed. And that's when I heard it. A cry. It was coming from the next room. It was not the healthy, robust, angry cry of a newborn. It was a weak, thin, and struggling sound. A desperate, kitten-like mewling that seemed to be punctuated by a terrible, gasping struggle for breath. My own maternal instincts, now on high alert, kicked in immediately. I waited, listening for the sound of a nurse's footsteps, of a mother's soothing voice, but the crying just went on and on. A lonely, desperate sound in the quiet of the night. Something felt wrong. Deeply wrong. Slowly, carefully, I slid out of my own hospital bed, my body aching, and I shuffled in my slippers to the door of my room. I peeked out into the long, dimly lit hallway. It was empty. The crying from the next room continued, a heartbreaking, lonely sound that seemed to pull at my very soul. I crept to the door of the next room. It was slightly ajar. I pushed it open just a crack and peered inside. The room was dark, save for the harsh, clinical glow of the monitors above the bed. The bed itself was empty, its sheets stripped, the mattress bare. But on the corner of the room, under that cold, unforgiving light, was a small, plastic hospital bassinet. And inside that bassinet was a tiny, newborn baby girl, all alone, her little chest heaving with the effort of each tiny, struggling breath. There was no mother, there was no nurse. She was completely and totally abandoned. I didn't think, I just acted. I pushed the door open and rushed to her side. She was so small, even smaller than my Arthur, and there was a faint but unmistakable bluish tinge to her tiny lips. I gently, carefully scooped her up from the cold, plastic bassinet. She was impossibly light, a tiny, fragile bird. I held her close against my own heart, her small, cold cheek resting on my chest. I began to hum, a low, soft, and wordless lullaby, the same one I had been humming to my own son just hours before. I swayed back and forth, my own body a warm, comforting anchor in her cold, terrifying, brand-new world. And a miracle happened. As I held this tiny, perfect stranger against my own heart, her struggling, ragged breaths began to even out. The frantic, desperate edge to her cry softened, becoming a quiet, rhythmic whimper. I had no medical equipment, no training in neonatal care. All I had was the simple, profound, and instinctive warmth of a mother, and it was, it seemed, what she had needed. I stood there in the dark, silent room, holding this strange, beautiful child, and I felt a fierce, inexplicable, and deeply maternal connection to her, a bond that seemed to defy all logic. I had no idea, in that moment, that the connection between us was not a coincidence, not a random act of fate in a hospital hallway. I had no idea it was a secret, a betrayal, and a tragedy that was about to bind our two families together in the most shocking and heartbreaking way imaginable, forever. The silence in that dark hospital room was broken by the frantic, squeaking sounds of a nurse's rubber-soled shoes in the hallway. A moment later, a young, panicked-looking nurse rushed in, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and relief. "Oh my God!" she gasped, her hand flying to her chest as she saw me standing there, holding the tiny, now quiet baby. "We've been looking for her mother everywhere. She vanished." I looked down at the small, perfect, and impossibly fragile child in my arms. Her breathing was even now, her tiny body warm against my own. I felt a surge of pure, protective love for her, a feeling so fierce and so immediate it was almost frightening. "Her mother is gone?" I whispered. "She left a fake name, a fake address," the nurse explained, her voice a low, angry hum as she began to check the baby's vitals. "Happens more often than you'd think. We didn't realize the baby was alone. The alarms on this wing have been faulty." She then looked at me, her professional anger softening into a look of genuine gratitude. You may have just saved her life. Her breathing was unstable. The skin-to-skin contact, the warmth, it was exactly what she needed." The sacrifice I made that night was a small and simple one. I chose not to be a bystander. I chose to step into another person's story, to offer a moment of comfort to a child who had no one else. It was a choice that felt as natural and as necessary as breathing. The next morning when my husband, Samuel, arrived, his own face full of the rosy, sleep-deprived glow of new fatherhood, I told him the story of the abandoned baby. He was horrified, of course. He held my hand, his eyes full of a deep, compassionate sadness. It's unthinkable," he said, shaking his head. "Who would do such a thing? The poor little girl." He was the perfect, loving, and supportive husband. His reaction a mirror of my own righteous indignation. His performance, I would later realize, was flawless. I had to say goodbye to the little girl later that day. A kind-faced woman from Child Protective Services came to take her. They had given her a temporary name, Luna, because she had been found in the pale, quiet light of the moon. I held her one last time, my heart aching with a strange, unfamiliar grief for a child that was not my own. And then she was gone, a ghost that had drifted into my life and then, just as quickly, drifted out again. The 9 months that followed were a beautiful, happy, and intoxicating blur. My life was perfect. Our son, Arthur, was a dream. a happy, healthy baby who filled our small home with a joy so profound it was almost a physical presence. And Samuel? He was a natural father. He was patient and loving and completely, totally, and utterly devoted to me and to our son. He would come home from work, and his entire face would light up the moment he saw Arthur. He would spend hours on the floor, making silly faces, his deep, rumbling laugh the constant, happy soundtrack of our new life. I was living in a bubble of pure domestic bliss. The memory of that strange, sad night in the hospital, of the little abandoned girl, faded into the background. A strange, half-forgotten dream. I would think of her sometimes, a fleeting, poignant ache in my heart. I wonder what happened to that little girl, I'd say to Samuel. Luna. He would just shake his head, a look of sad pity on his face. You have such a big heart, Maddie, he would say, pulling me into a hug. But you can't save the whole world. You have our own little world to worry about now. The only strange, discordant note in our perfect symphony happened one lazy Sunday afternoon. I was looking through Samuel's old college yearbooks, laughing at the terrible 90s hairstyles. I turned a page and saw a picture of the university's art club, and I saw her, a young woman with a wild mane of dark, curly hair and a pair of the most striking, unusual, light green eyes I had ever seen. The same eyes as the baby from the hospital. I asked, my voice casual, "Who's this?" Samuel had glanced at the picture, and for a split second I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a shadow, a memory before his usual, easy smile returned. "Oh, her," he'd said with a dismissive shrug. "Just a girl from my art history class. A bit of a dramatic, troubled soul. I barely knew her." It was nothing, a coincidence. And yet, the memory of those eyes, so unique, so unforgettable, lingered. It was a Tuesday, a perfectly ordinary afternoon 9 months after Arthur was born. He was on the living room floor, just on the verge of mastering the art of crawling. The sun was streaming through the windows, and a knock came at the door. I opened it to a professional-looking woman in a simple, dark suit, a thick briefcase in her hand. "Mrs. Miller?" she asked, her voice polite but with an air of official business. "My name is Susan Gable. I'm a caseworker with the Department of Child and Family Services. May I come in for a moment? I need to speak with you and your husband about a child, a little girl named Luna." The name hit me with the force of a physical blow. Luna, the ghost from the hospital. She had come back. I invited the woman in, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind a swirl of confusion. I thought she was here because of a coincidence, because I was the one who had found the baby. Perhaps they needed me as a witness for some legal proceeding. I had no idea she was here because a state-mandated DNA database search had just returned an impossible, unbelievable, and world-shattering match. I had no idea that she was here because the only person on earth who could save that little girl's life was my husband. The social worker, Miss Gable, sat on my comfortable living room sofa, her hands folded neatly in her lap, and she delivered the news that would take my perfect, beautiful life and shatter it into a million unrecognizable pieces. Her voice was calm, professional, and utterly devastating. "The little girl you found in the hospital, Luna," she began, her eyes full of a practiced, gentle sympathy, "was diagnosed 2 months ago with an extremely rare, aggressive form of leukemia. Her chances of survival are very slim unless she can find a bone marrow donor. A perfect match." "Oh my God," I whispered, my hand flying to my mouth. "That poor baby." "We've spent the last 8 weeks running her DNA against every national and international donor registry," Miss Gable continued, her voice steady. "We found no matches. As a last resort, we ran her paternal DNA markers through a public genealogy database, hoping to find a distant relative, a cousin, anyone,
And she paused, taking a deep, steadying breath. We found a match. A perfect, 100% match. A biological father. I just stared at her, my heart aching for this poor, lost little girl who now, at least, had a chance. "That's wonderful news," I said. "You found her father, so he can save her?" Miss Gable's eyes, full of that professional pity, met mine. And in that moment, I knew. Before she even said the words, a cold, sickening premonition washed over me. "The man who was a perfect paternal match for Luna," she said, her voice now a soft, careful whisper, "the only person on this planet who can save her life is your husband, Samuel Miller." The world went silent. The friendly ticking of the clock on my mantelpiece, the sound of my own son, Arthur, babbling happily in his playpen in the corner, it all just faded away into a dull roaring in my ears. I stared at the kind-faced woman on my sofa, and her words replayed in my mind, a nonsensical, impossible string of sounds. Your husband, biological father, a perfect match. "No," I finally whispered, a single broken word. "No, that's impossible. There has to be a mistake, a lab error. Samuel, he would never, we..." She just looked at me with those sad, knowing eyes, the eyes of a woman who had delivered this kind of life-shattering news too many times before. She opened her briefcase and slid a single, official-looking document across the coffee table towards me. It was the lab report. I saw the complex charts, the strings of genetic markers, and I saw the two names, linked by a single, undeniable, and scientifically irrefutable line. Luna. Samuel Miller. My mind, in an act of pure, agonizing self-defense, began to unravel. It was a frantic, horrifying cascade of recontextualized memories. The photograph, the girl in his college yearbook, the one he had called a dramatic, troubled soul, the one with the wild, dark hair and the striking, unforgettable, light green eyes. Luna's eyes. His reaction when I had asked about her, the flicker of a shadow, the too quick dismissal. I began to do the math, my brain a cold, frantic calculator. The affair had to have happened about 1.5 years ago, months before I had gotten pregnant with Arthur, back when we were still trying and failing to have a baby of our own, a time when our own marriage had been strained, when he had been distant, working late, going on business trips I had never questioned, because I had trusted him. I had trusted him completely. "I am so, so sorry to be the one to tell you this, Mrs. Miller. But this little girl, she doesn't have much time. We need to speak with your husband as soon as possible. We need to know if he is willing to be tested to donate."
I don't remember her leaving. I just remember sitting on my sofa in the silent, sunlit living room, the lab report a cold, heavy weight in my lap for what felt like an eternity. My perfect life, my perfect marriage, my perfect husband. It was all a lie. A beautiful, elaborate, and devastating lie. My heartbreak was so profound, so absolute, that I felt like I was physically breaking apart. I heard his key in the door a few hours later. I heard his cheerful, familiar call. "Maddie, honey, I'm home." He walked into the living room, his face full of a happy, end-of-the-workday relief, a smile on his face as he saw me. His smile died the moment he saw the look in my eyes. "Maddie, what is it? What's wrong?" he asked, a look of genuine concern on his face. He rushed to my side. "Are you okay? Is Arthur okay?" I didn't speak. I just handed him the lab report. I watched him read it. I watched as his face, his kind, loving and treacherous face, went through a rapid, brutal series of transformations. First, a look of pure, baffled confusion,
Then, as his eyes found the names, a flicker of dawning, horrified recognition. And finally, as the full, catastrophic weight of the truth settled upon him, his face crumpled into a mask of pure, abject, and undeniable guilt. He sank to the floor at my feet, the paper fluttering from his nerveless fingers. "Maddie," he sobbed, his face in his hands, "I'm so sorry. I was going to tell you. I swear to God I was going to tell you. It was a mistake. A single, terrible mistake. I didn't even know she was pregnant. I swear. I never knew." He was crying, he was begging, he was apologizing, but his words were a distant, meaningless noise. The only thing I could see was the face of a tiny, struggling, and abandoned baby girl in a cold, plastic hospital bassinet. A baby girl who was his daughter. A baby girl who was my son's sister. A baby girl who was dying. And he, this man, this stranger who was my husband, was the only person in the entire world who could save her. My own heartbreak, my own sense of betrayal, as profound and as all-consuming as it was, would have to wait. There was a decision to be made. A decision that had nothing to do with me, or with him, or with our broken marriage. It was a decision about the life of an innocent, dying child. And it was a decision that I, the wronged wife, the woman who had been so profoundly and completely betrayed, was now in the terrible, impossible position of having to make. I looked down at the man crumpled on the floor at my feet, the man I had called my husband, and I felt nothing. The storm of emotions I should have felt, the rage, the jealousy, the searing pain of betrayal, was absent. In its place was a vast, cold, and unnervingly quiet emptiness. He was sobbing, his words a pathetic, tangled mess of excuses and apologies. A mistake, a one-night stand, he never knew, he was going to tell me, he was so sorry. His words were a distant, meaningless noise, like the buzzing of a fly in a room where a bomb had just gone off. The only thing that was real was the face of the little girl in hospital, the one with my husband's eyes who was dying. I stood up from the sofa, my movements stiff and robotic. "Get up, Samuel," I said, my voice a cold, flat instrument I did not recognize as my own. "Your feelings are not the priority right now. Your self-pity is a luxury we cannot afford. Your daughter," I said the word, and it was a sharp, jagged thing in the air between us, "is dying. That is the only thing that matters." He looked up at me, his face a ruin of tears and shame. "Maddie, please," he whispered. "Don't," I said, holding up a hand, a gesture that stopped him cold. "Don't speak. Just listen." I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up my phone. I dialed the number for the social worker, Ms. Gable. She answered on the first ring. "Ms. Gable," I said, my voice a perfect imitation of calm professionalism. "It's Madeline Miller. My husband, Samuel, is here with me now. He has been informed of the situation, he is willing to be tested immediately, and he is willing to donate." I could hear the profound, audible sigh of relief on the other end of the line. "Thank God," she whispered. "Mrs. Miller, you have no idea what this means. Can you both come to the hospital now?" "We're on our way," I said, and I hung up. The car ride to the hospital was a 20-minute journey through a silent, frozen hell. We did not speak, we did not look at each other. We were no longer a husband and a wife. We were two strangers bound together by a terrible, tragic duty. He was the cause of a crisis, and I, it seemed, was its unwilling architect of a solution. At the hospital, we were fast-tracked, a blur of doctors and nurses and blood tests. Samuel was a ghost, a passive, compliant shell of a man, doing whatever he was told, his eyes never leaving my face, searching for a flicker of forgiveness, of a warmth that was no longer there. I gave him nothing. My heart was a block of ice, my focus solely on the task at hand. While we waited for the final cross-matching results, I did something I knew I had to do. I went to the neonatal intensive care unit. I went to go and see her, Luna. She was in a small, clear, plastic incubator, a tiny, fragile doll surrounded by a web of tubes and wires. She was so small, so pale. But her eyes, the same striking, light green eyes I remembered, were open. And as I stood there, looking at her, at my husband's secret daughter, at my son's half-sister, the cold, hard wall of ice around my own heart began to crack. She was not a symbol of his betrayal. She was just a baby, an innocent, beautiful, and desperately sick little girl who had done nothing to deserve the terrible, lonely hand she had been dealt. And my heart, which I thought had been broken beyond repair, broke all over again. But this time, it broke for her. A doctor came to find us in the waiting room an hour later. The news was what we had expected. Samuel was a perfect 1-in-a-million match. The transplant could proceed. It was scheduled for the next morning. Luna had a chance. She was going to live. As the doctor walked away, a wave of profound, exhausted relief washed over me. The immediate crisis was over. The decision had been made. But as I looked at my husband, at the man whose infidelity was about to save his own daughter's life, I knew that the real and far more difficult decision was still to come. Ms. Gable, the social worker, found us a few minutes later, her own face full of a quiet, professional sympathy. "The procedure is a go," she said with a small, relieved smile. "Now," she continued, her expression becoming more serious, "we have to discuss the future. The biological mother, as you know, fled the hospital. She has since been located and she has formally and legally relinquished all of her parental rights." She looked from Samuel to me. "Luna will need a permanent, stable, and loving home when she recovers from this. As the biological father, Samuel, you are the primary and the only candidate for custody." Then she turned her gaze fully on me, and her eyes were full of a deep and deeply sad understanding. "But," she said, her voice now a gentle, quiet thing, "we cannot and we will not place a child in an unstable home. The decision of what happens to Luna, of what happens to your family, now rests, in its entirety, with you, Madeline." She was right. The choice was mine. He had saved the child's life, but I was the one who had to decide if I had the strength to save his. I had to decide if our family was a casualty of his betrayal, a sad, broken thing to be discarded, or if it was strong enough, if I was strong enough, to become something new, something bigger, something that could make room for one more beautiful, innocent, and very broken little heart. I stood in the cold, sterile hallway of the hospital, the social worker's words echoing in the silence long after she had gone. The decision now rests, in its entirety, with you, Madeline. It was a burden and a power I had never asked for. My husband, Samuel, stood a few feet away, his face a ruin of shame and a fragile, pleading hope. He was waiting for my verdict on his life, on his secret daughter's life, on our life. The transplant the next morning was a success. Samuel was a hero. The man whose betrayal had nearly destroyed me had just, with a simple, selfless act, saved a life. The irony was a constant, bitter taste in my mouth. For the next few weeks, as Luna began the slow, arduous, but miraculous journey of recovery in her small, sterile hospital room, I was forced to navigate the wreckage of my own heart. There were days of pure, unadulterated rage, days when I would look at my husband and see nothing but a stranger, a liar, a man who had built our perfect life on a foundation of deceit. I would think of his hands, the same hands that had held mine during the birth of my son, holding another woman. The pain was a physical thing, a shard of glass in my chest. On those days, the answer was simple. I would leave him. I would take my son, Arthur, and I would build a new life, a life free from the taint of his lies. Luna would go into the foster care system, a sad but necessary casualty of her father's sins. But then there were the other days. The days I would spend sitting in a rocking chair beside Luna's incubator, watching her sleep. I would look at her tiny, perfect face, at her small, determined fight for life, and I would see him. I would see the curve of his smile in her sleeping lips. I would see the deep, intelligent curiosity of his eyes in hers. And I would see my own son, Arthur, in the shape of her small, perfect hands. She was not just the product of his betrayal. She was an innocent. She was his daughter. She was my son's sister, and she had no one. It was during one of those long, quiet nights in the hospital that my final decision was made. I was holding Luna, her small, warm body a comforting weight against my chest, and my own son, Arthur, was asleep in his carrier beside me. I looked from one child to the other, at these two beautiful, innocent halves of my husband's heart, and I knew with a certainty so profound it was a physical ache that I could not be the one to separate them. I could not be the one to sentence this little girl to a life of foster homes, of being a ward of the state, a victim of her parents' mistakes. My love for my own son, the fierce, protective, and all-consuming love of a mother, had expanded. It had stretched, and it had made room. I walked out of that hospital room and found my husband in the waiting room, where he had been sleeping in a chair for the past 3 weeks, never wanting to be far from either of us. I told him my decision.
"We are not getting a divorce," I said. My voice quiet but firm. "Not now. But our marriage, the one we had, is over. That died the day I found out about your lie." I looked at him, my eyes clear and hard. "We are going to build something new. A different kind of family. A broken one, maybe, but an honest one. We are going to adopt Luna. She will be our daughter. She will be Arthur's sister. And you," I said, my voice now a whisper, "will spend the rest of your life earning back the trust you so completely and totally shattered." The months that followed were a difficult, painful, and beautiful process of rebuilding. We brought Luna home. Our small, quiet house was now filled with the chaotic, joyful noise of 2 babies. There were sleepless nights, and there were days when I would look at my husband and feel nothing but a cold, empty distance. But there were also moments of grace, moments when I would see Samuel holding both his children, a look of such profound, humbled gratitude on his face that a small, fragile part of my own heart would begin to thaw. We were not a fairy tale. We were a work in progress, a messy, complicated, and deeply imperfect family, held together by a shared, fierce love for 2 beautiful children. It has been a year now. I am sitting on a blanket in a sun-drenched park. My son, Arthur, a boisterous and happy 1-year-old, is chasing a butterfly across the grass. My husband, my partner, Samuel, is sitting beside me. And in my arms, sleeping peacefully, is our daughter, Luna. She is healthy, she is happy, and she is home. I look at her, at this beautiful, resilient little girl, and I think about the strange, impossible journey that brought her into my life. I had walked into that hospital room a year ago, a brand new mother, my heart full of a simple, perfect love for my own child. I had not known that my heart was capable of so much more. I had thought my act of kindness that night was for a stranger. I had no idea I was actually saving my own family. My marriage had been broken by a secret. But my family, this new, strange, and beautiful family,
had been saved by a choice. The choice to love more. The choice to be a mother, not just to the child that I had given birth to, but to the child who had, in the most unexpected and heartbreaking way, been given to me. An absolutely beautiful and heartbreaking story about the power of a mother's love and the true meaning of family. What do you think of Madeline's incredible, selfless decision? Let us know your thoughts on this complex and emotional story in the comments below. If you were moved by this powerful story of forgiveness and healing, please show your support by hitting that like button, and be sure to subscribe for more incredible stories every day. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.